My fiancé posted, "Sometimes you outgrow people," 2 days after I lost my job. I commented one word beneath it, "Truth." At the time, Mason thought I was agreeing with him. He had no idea I was saying goodbye. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and until that Thursday morning, I had spent 5 years working as a software developer for a mid-sized technology company downtown. At 9:17 a.m., my manager invited me into a conference room with a glass wall and a dying plant in the corner. A woman from Human Resources was already waiting with a folder resting in front of her. That was when I knew. The company was restructuring. My position had been eliminated. It was not related to my performance. I would receive 6 weeks of severance, my health insurance would continue through the end of the month, and someone from IT would escort me back to my desk. The explanation lasted less than 4 minutes. 5 years of late releases, emergency bug fixes, canceled weekends, and answering messages during family dinners had been reduced to a folder and a carefully rehearsed apology. By noon, I was standing outside the building with a cardboard box containing 2 coffee mugs, a framed photograph of my parents, and the small desk fan Mason had given me during our first summer together. I called him from the parking garage. "Hey," he answered, "I'm about to go into a meeting." "I got laid off." There was a pause. Not the kind where someone is searching for the right words to comfort you. It felt more like he was recalculating something. "Seriously?" "The restructuring happened this morning. My whole department lost people." "That's bad." I tightened my grip on the box. "I'll be okay. I have severance, and I've saved enough to cover my expenses for at least 6 months. 6 months? The concern in his voice sharpened, but not in the way I expected. "I'm not saying it will take 6 months. I'm saying I prepared for emergencies." "Right, of course." Someone spoke in the background. "I have to go. We'll talk tonight." The call ended before I could ask if he was coming over. Mason Reed was 29, worked as a recruiting coordinator for a regional consulting firm, and had been my fiancé for 8 months after nearly 3 years together. Our wedding was set for the following spring. We still lived apart because our leases ended at different times, though Mason always insisted waiting until marriage would make moving in feel more meaningful. I had never questioned that logic before. Instead of falling apart, I spent the afternoon updating my resume, reaching out to former coworkers, and submitting applications. By the time Mason came over Friday evening, I had already lined up my first interview. I cooked pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and tried to treat the layoff for what it was, a setback, not the end of my career. Mason barely touched his dinner. "How long do you think you'll be unemployed?" "Hopefully only a few weeks, maybe a couple of months." "A couple of months without a paycheck?" "I have severance and enough savings to cover myself." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." He rolled the stem of his wine glass between his fingers without looking at me. "We're supposed to be planning a wedding, buying a place together. This changes everything." "It changes where I work, Mason. It doesn't change who I am." "You don't know that." Only 1 day had passed since the layoff, yet he spoke as though I'd already given up on my future. "I spent all day applying for jobs," I reminded him. "I've already scheduled an interview." "I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to be realistic." "So am I." He took a slow sip of wine before quietly saying, "I just need some time to think about us." Those words hurt more than losing my job. He left before 9, claiming he had a headache. Instead of kissing me goodbye, he brushed my forehead with his lips and promised to call the next morning. He never did. Saturday morning, while drinking coffee in bed, I opened Instagram and found his newest post. It showed him, sitting alone beside the window of an expensive cafe, staring thoughtfully into the distance. The caption read, "Sometimes you outgrow people. Not everyone can match your energy, your standards, or your ambition. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's growth." Within hours, the comments filled with praise. "You deserve someone on your level. Proud of you for choosing yourself. Some people only belong in one chapter." I reread the caption several times, hoping I had misunderstood it. Then my phone buzzed. "Mason, we need to talk." I called immediately. "What was that post supposed to mean?" He let out a long breath. "I've been thinking about this for a while." "Really? Because 48 hours ago, you were still planning our wedding." "That's not fair." "No? You posted about outgrowing someone less than 2 days after I lost my job." His voice turned colder. "I'm moving forward with my career, Claire. I need a partner with the same ambition." Until Thursday, I had earned $26,000 more than he did. I'd paid for most of our vacations, covered our wedding photographer's deposit when his bonus was delayed, and spent 5 years working my way from junior developer to one of the strongest engineers on my team. You think one layoff erased all of that? It clarified things. What things? That maybe we're not on the same level anymore. That was the moment everything became painfully clear. The hesitation I'd been hoping to see simply wasn't there. He had already made his decision. "So you're ending our engagement?" "I think it's what's best for both of us." "You mean it's what's best for you?" After a long silence, he answered, Yes. 3 years together ended in less than 6 minutes. He kept talking, insisting he still cared about me, but I wasn't listening anymore. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger, set it on the nightstand, and ended the call. Then I reopened Instagram. His friends were still applauding his courage beneath that post. I added a single comment. "Truth." Then I blocked him. Mason thought losing my job had revealed a lack of ambition. What it really revealed was the kind of man he was. I just didn't realize yet that the worst week of my life was about to lead me towards someone who would change it completely. 2 weeks after the breakup, a recruiter from a company I'd interviewed with months earlier unexpectedly called. Back then, they had been too small to hire another senior developer, so I assumed "we'll keep your resume on file" was simply a polite rejection. Instead, she asked, "Claire, are you still available?" "The company just closed a major funding round," she explained. "The CEO would like to meet you about a senior developer position." "Tomorrow?" "If possible." 2 weeks earlier, my dining table had been buried beneath wedding contracts and guest lists. Now, it held a laptop, cold coffee, and the velvet box containing the engagement ring I'd taken off. "Tomorrow works." The office occupied the top floors of a renovated brick building downtown. It lacked the polished corporate feel of my former employer, but the energy was impossible to miss. People moved quickly. Conversations spilled between glass meeting rooms, and the place felt like something still being built rather than carefully maintained. I expected another recruiter. Instead, the CEO walked in carrying my resume. "Claire Bennett?" "Adrian Cole." He introduced himself after we shook hands. "I know." He smiled. "Hopefully that's a good thing." The interview immediately felt different. Adrian skipped the usual in-interview tricks and asked practical questions about systems I'd built, mistakes I'd made, and what those mistakes had taught me. When I described a failed product launch from my previous company, he didn't ask who was responsible. He asked why it failed. "We rushed because management promised investors an unrealistic deadline." "And your mistake?" "I saw the warning signs but didn't push back hard enough." "Why?" "I assumed people above me knew better." "And did they?" "No." For the first time, Adrian closed his notebook. "That's the kind of answer I trust," he said. "Anyone can claim success. Very few people can explain failure honestly." The 45-minute interview stretched into nearly 2 hours as we moved from engineering to leadership, company culture, and the kind of people he wanted helping build the business. "I need someone willing to tell me when I'm making a bad decision," he said. "Are you actually willing to hear it?" "No." His answer came so quickly that I laughed. "But I'm getting better." Before ending the interview, he slid an offer across the table. $165,000 base salary, equity, full benefits, and performance bonuses. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. I had been making $78,000 at my previous job. "We're not hiring you because you're unemployed," Adrian said after noticing my reaction. "We're hiring you because your experience is worth that number." For the past 2 weeks, Mason's voice had followed me everywhere. Maybe we're not on the same level anymore. Adrian erased that sentence in less than 30 seconds. "Can you start in 2 weeks?" "Yes." He stood and shook my hand. "Welcome to the team." Walking back to my car, I instinctively reached for my phone to call Mason, before remembering there was no Mason left to call. For 3 years, every promotion, raise, or milestone had belonged to both of us. Instead, I called my mother. "You're making how much?" "165, she gasped. "Claire, are you sure this company is legal?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Pretty sure." That's exactly what a criminal CEO would want you to believe. By the time I started 3 weeks later, I finally understood why the company had grown so quickly. There were only 32 employees, but everyone worked with the urgency of people building something they genuinely believed in instead of simply collecting another paycheck. The company moved fast, sometimes almost chaotically, but every project felt meaningful. Instead of maintaining outdated systems like my old job, I was helping build something new, and Adrian seemed to be involved in every part of it. He could debate software architecture with engineers in the morning, negotiate with investors in the afternoon, and somehow still know exactly where every project stood. He expected a lot from people, but he never hid behind vague criticism. If something needed fixing, he explained why. If someone did great work, he made sure everyone knew it. During my second week, I challenged one of his deadlines in front of the entire engineering team. "We can release by Friday," Adrian said. "We can release something by Friday," I answered, "but I'm not convinced customers should use it." The room fell silent. At my previous company, disagreeing with the CEO in a planning meeting would have been career suicide. Adrian simply studied the schedule for a moment before asking, "How much more time?" "A week. You get 4 days. 5. He smiled. 4.5? That's not a real deadline. It is now. Laughter broke the tension, and by the end of the meeting, he'd pushed the release back anyway. Later that afternoon, he stopped beside my desk. "You were right." "I know." He laughed. "I was afraid you'd say that." By the end of my first month, we had quietly settled into an easy routine. Some mornings, we'd grab coffee after leadership meetings. Other days, we'd realize neither of us had eaten until mid-afternoon and disappear for a quick lunch. Our conversations drifted from work to books, travel, and terrible movies, but we were careful never to blur professional boundaries inside the office. Still, I noticed the small things. He never forgot details from earlier conversations, and whenever he stopped by my desk with a quick question, it usually turned into a discussion neither of us seemed eager to end. About 6 weeks after I joined the company, the engineering team stayed late to finish a client release. By 9 o'clock, almost everyone had gone home when Adrian walked over with his jacket slung across one shoulder. "Please tell me you've eaten." "I had half a protein bar." "That isn't dinner. It had chocolate." "That's candy pretending to be food." I laughed as I shut my laptop. There's a Thai place still open. Want to grab dinner? I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. As co-workers, he added with a grin, 2 overworked co-workers, surviving on caffeine and bad decisions. That sounds safe enough. The restaurant was nearly empty, and once work was out of the way, he asked how I'd become available so suddenly after interviewing months earlier. I got laid off. I know that part. My fiancé ended our engagement 2 days later. His expression hardened. He left because you lost your job? He said we didn't have the same ambition anymore. Adrian slowly shook his head. That's a convenient way to rename abandonment. I looked at him. What do you mean? It wasn't ambition, Adrian said quietly. He wanted certainty. The moment life became uncertain, he walked away. No one had ever described Mason that way before. When I asked about his own past, Adrian admitted he'd been divorced for 2 years. As his company grew, so did the distance between him and his wife. I convinced myself I was building our future, he said quietly. She thought I was disappearing from it. So who was right? He smiled sadly. Probably both. We stayed until the staff began stacking chairs around us. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining beneath the city lights. This was nice, Adrian said as we reached my car. It was. We should do it again. For another work emergency? He smiled. No, off the clock. Every sensible part of me knew the situation was complicated. He was my CEO, and I'd only recently survived one relationship that had left me questioning my own worth. But Adrian never looked at me like someone he needed to evaluate. He looked at me like someone he genuinely wanted to know. I'd like that, I said. Over the next several weeks, dinner became coffee. Coffee became weekend walks, and without either of us noticing exactly when it happened, friendship quietly became something more. The first time he reached for my hand, we were leaving dinner after another long product launch. I stumbled over a crack in the parking garage, and he caught me before I lost my balance. Neither of us pulled away immediately. There was nothing dramatic about it. No grand confession. No cinematic moment. Just the simple realization that being with him felt easy. Because of that, we protected it. At work, we remained nothing more than CEO and senior developer. Meetings stayed professional. Conversations returned to deadlines the moment someone entered the room, and we gave the office nothing to gossip about. Some things were worth taking slowly. Because the company was small, we agreed to keep our relationship separate from work. Inside the office, Adrian was still the CEO and I was still a senior developer. Neither of us wanted personal gossip overshadowing the work we'd both poured ourselves into. About 2 months after I joined the company, he invited me to his house for dinner. I should warn you, he said while chopping vegetables. I cook with far more confidence than skill. He wasn't exaggerating. The chicken was dry enough to qualify as a building material. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my wine. I built a software company, he protested. Nobody promised I'd know how to season food. They probably assumed basic survival skills came with the job. Clearly they expected too much. It was the hardest I'd laughed in months. With Mason, happiness always seemed to come with conditions. A promotion became a discussion about money. Working late became proof I wasn't committed enough. Somehow every achievement eventually turned back into a conversation about him. Adrian was different. He listened instead of waiting to speak. He remembered small details I'd forgotten mentioning, from my father's surgery years earlier to the author of a novel I'd casually recommended. A week later, I found that same book on his coffee table because he'd bought it just to understand why I liked it. He never tried to impress me. That quiet kind of kindness was strangely unsettling because it meant I was beginning to trust someone again. 3 weeks later, Human Resources announced the company's annual holiday gala. It wasn't an ordinary office party. It was where investors, clients, industry partners, and local business media all gathered each year. That afternoon, Adrian stopped beside my desk. Busy Friday night? I was planning to organize my sock drawer. A devastating loss. I know. He smiled. Come to the gala with me. As your employee? As my date. I looked at him for several seconds. You know people will talk. They probably already are. You own the company. And you were hired months before we ever had dinner. That won't stop speculation. No, he admitted. Which is why every decision involving your job will go through other executives, not me. And if people still gossip? He shrugged. They're free to. Then his expression softened. I'm not asking because it's convenient, Claire. I'm asking because I want to spend the evening with you. Then, yes, his smile answered before he spoke. I'll pick you up at 7. That night, I stood in front of my closet realizing the gala wasn't what scared me. Neither was Adrian. What frightened me was believing I could be this happy again after everything Mason had made me doubt. 2 days before the gala, LinkedIn interrupted that thought. Mason Reed wants to send you a message. His profile picture hadn't changed, and neither had the carefully polished image he always tried to project. Congratulations on the new job. I've been thinking about you. Maybe we could meet and talk. I ignored it. An hour later, another message arrived. I'd really like the chance to explain myself. The following morning came one more. Please don't ignore me. I blocked him without replying. That should have been the end of it. Instead, my phone rang that evening from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Claire? I recognized Mason's voice immediately. I had to borrow a friend's phone, he said, because I blocked yours. I just wanted to talk. We already did. I made a mistake. You ended our engagement because you decided I wasn't ambitious enough. A long silence followed. I wasn't thinking clearly. Neither was I when I believed we'd spend the rest of our lives together. I've had time to think. So have I. Can we meet? No. Please. I genuinely hope your life turns out well, Mason. I don't want my life without... I ended the call before he could finish and blocked the number. The next morning, Kevin, one of my former coworkers, texted to apologize. Didn't know you two had split. Mason asked me for your new number last week. I didn't realize he'd keep contacting you. I replied almost immediately. No worries. Just don't give him another way to reach me. You have my word. By Friday evening, Mason had slipped back into the background of my thoughts. Right on time, Adrian arrived to pick me up for the gala. When I opened the door, he stopped for a second before smiling. I suddenly think this suit isn't good enough. You own the suit. I know. He looked at me again. You just made it seem inadequate. I laughed. You look great. So do you. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as investors, founders, clients, and journalists filled the room. Adrian moved easily through the crowd, introducing me to people I'd only read about online. This is Claire. That was all he ever said. Not my employee. Not one of my developers. Just Claire. It was a small detail, but it mattered. For the first time in months, I wasn't someone's ex-fiancé or the woman who'd been dumped after losing her job. I was simply myself. About an hour into the evening, I noticed someone watching us from across the room. Mason. He stood beside a cocktail table in a navy tuxedo, frozen in place, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The moment our eyes met, he started walking straight toward us. I leaned closer to Adrian. My ex. The fiancé? I nodded. You don't have to talk to him. I don't think that's going to be his choice. A few seconds later, Mason stopped in front of us. Claire. His voice carried farther than he probably intended, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. Hi, Mason. He looked from me to Adrian, still trying to process why we were standing together. I didn't know you'd be here. I work here. Mason's eyes shifted to Adrian. Before I could say anything, Adrian offered his hand. I'm Adrian Cole. Mason Reed. After a brief, awkward silence, Mason forced a smile. We go way back. Claire told me about you, Adrian replied evenly. I'm her boyfriend. The color drained from Mason's face. Boyfriend? And her CEO, Adrian added with a polite smile. It's nice to finally meet you. Mason looked from Adrian to me, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. You're dating your boss? Yes. That happened fast. So did you ending our engagement because I lost my job? The conversations around us grew noticeably quieter. I was confused, Mason said. You seemed confident enough to tell me I wasn't ambitious. I didn't mean it that way. You decided one layoff to find my future. His shoulders slumped. I made a mistake. For a moment, I simply looked at him. The anger I'd carried for weeks was gone. Standing beside Adrian, surrounded by colleagues who respected me for my work, Mason no longer looked intimidating. He looked like someone finally realizing what he'd thrown away. Adrian gently touched the middle of my back. We should go say hello to the Seattle investors. Adrian wasn't rescuing me. He was simply giving me the chance to walk away with my dignity. I smiled. Goodbye, Mason. He reached toward me. Claire, wait. I already did. For 3 years. Not anymore. Adrian and I walked away, leaving Mason standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. I assumed that would finally be the end of it. Instead, my phone began vibrating before we even reached the parking garage. Instagram requests. Unknown numbers. LinkedIn messages. One account after another. Please talk to me. Don't do this. Every message received the same response. Block. Adrian glanced at my phone. Him again? He keeps making new accounts. He suddenly believes in second chances. Once we were inside the car, he looked at me and said quietly, You don't have to deal with this by yourself. He didn't reach for my phone or tell me what to do. He simply reminded me that I wasn't dealing with it alone anymore. The messages continued all weekend. Mason reached out through LinkedIn, email, new phone numbers, and every account he could create, each message asking for closure, another conversation, or one more chance to explain himself. I blocked every one of them without replying. Late Sunday afternoon, Kevin called. I owe you an apology. You gave him my number. I honestly thought he wanted to apologize. He doesn't. Kevin sighed. I figured that out after he called me 4 times, asking whether you and Adrian are actually together. We are. I told him that. What did he say? He insisted nobody moves on that quickly unless something had already been going on. I almost laughed. It was exactly the kind of story Mason needed to believe. Because accepting the truth that I'd rebuilt my life after he walked away was much harder than convincing himself he'd been replaced. When people can't accept the truth, they usually invent a version that's easier to live with. By Monday morning, I was determined to leave the weekend behind. That plan lasted less than an hour. Our office manager, Linda, stopped by my desk and quietly asked if we could talk. The moment she closed the meeting room door, I knew something was wrong. Did someone named Mason Reed try to contact you this weekend? My stomach dropped. Yeah, why? He called reception Saturday morning, claiming there was a family emergency and insisted he had to reach you immediately. My family is fine. I assumed so. She explained that company policy prohibited transferring personal calls or confirming whether employees were working, but Mason refused to accept no for an answer. He demanded my schedule, asked whether Adrian and I were involved, and finally accused the company of hiding an inappropriate relationship. "I'm sorry," I said. Linda shook her head. "You don't owe anyone an apology. You're not the one pretending someone died just to get through reception." When I told Adrian what had happened, his expression hardened. He contacted the office and lied about a family emergency. He reached for his phone. "I'll notify legal. I can keep blocking him." "And you should," Adrian said. "But once someone uses company channels to harass an employee after being told no, it stops being a private breakup and becomes a workplace issue." For the first time, I understood this wasn't affecting only me anymore. Tuesday afternoon, Kevin called. "Mason's telling people what happened at the gala." I expected that. It gets worse. According to Kevin, Mason had started claiming Adrian hired me because we were already involved, that my layoff had been fabricated, and that I'd actually been fired for misconduct. Every time someone questioned him, the story changed. I couldn't help laughing. "What misconduct?" "He never says." "And Adrian?" "Apparently he's manipulating female employees." I rubbed my forehead. "He's 34. "I know. I'm 31. "I know." "The rumor doesn't even make sense." "Most people realize that," Kevin replied. "Honestly, he's making himself look ridiculous." After the call, I told Adrian everything. He listened without interrupting. "So now he's attacking your professional reputation." "It sounds absurd. It also sounds defamatory. I don't want this turning into something bigger. It already has." He folded his hands. "I can ignore rumors about myself. I won't ignore someone trying to destroy your career." The next morning, Human Resources asked to meet with me. Melissa, the HR director, handed me an anonymous complaint alleging that my relationship with Adrian had started before I was hired, that I'd received preferential treatment, and that the company's hiring process had been unethical. There was no evidence, only accusations. I calmly walked her through the entire timeline: my interview months before the breakup, the job offer, my start date, when Adrian and I first began seeing each other, and the reporting structure that kept him out of employment decisions involving me. When I finished, Melissa asked one question. "Do you know who sent this?" "Yes." "My former fiancé." She nodded. "The same man who contacted reception pretending there was a family emergency?" "Yes." "And the same person you've repeatedly blocked?" I nodded again. "I've kept every message." I showed her the emails, LinkedIn requests, new phone numbers, social media accounts, call logs, and the screenshots Kevin had forwarded. Melissa reviewed everything quietly before setting the folder aside. "Thank you," she said. "This gives us the complete picture." Melissa set the folder aside and looked at me. "Claire, this isn't an ethics complaint." "It isn't?" She smiled. "It's harassment." The relief hit so suddenly I almost laughed. I was afraid people would think my relationship affected my hiring. "We verified the timeline before you walked into this room." She turned her monitor toward me and opened the hiring records. The interview panel had recommended hiring me long before Adrian and I had any personal relationship. Finance had approved my salary independently. My technical assessment ranked highest among every candidate, and beginning the following month, I would report to another engineering director instead of Adrian, a change already planned before the anonymous complaint arrived. "The company anticipated questions once your relationship became public," Melissa explained. "Everything was documented in advance. Months of anxiety disappeared in seconds. Mason had spent weeks convincing me people would question my ability. Instead, ordinary paperwork answered every accusation. When I left HR, Adrian was waiting outside. "Everything okay?" "They believed me." He smiled. "They believed the evidence." I laughed. "Fair enough." Once we were alone, he quietly added, "He's escalating." "I know. If he keeps going..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Neither of us expected Mason's next move. By Thursday afternoon, the anonymous rumors had stopped. Instead, he hired a lawyer. Melissa interrupted my afternoon with a request to join Adrian and the company's general counsel, Rachel Kim, in a conference room. A single envelope sat on the table. Rachel slid it toward me. "Your former fiancé has retained an attorney." I opened the letter. According to Mason's lawyer, Adrian had intentionally interfered with Mason's reasonable expectation of marriage, manipulated a vulnerable employee, destroyed his future family, and should formally apologize or face a civil lawsuit. I finished reading and looked up. Is this serious?" "Oh, it's real," Rachel said with a small laugh. "Ridiculous, but real." Adrian folded his arms. "Do we have any legal exposure?" "None." Rachel opened another folder containing the company's records. Claire interviewed on March 11th, accepted the offer on March 12th, and didn't have dinner with Adrian outside work until 6 weeks later. Building access logs, expense reports, and company records all confirm your relationship became personal well after your employment began. She closed the file. The documented timeline alone defeats every allegation. I let out a slow breath. "So what happens now?" Rachel smiled. "Now we respond with evidence." Rachel spent the next hour drafting the response while Adrian and I answered a few factual questions. Every allegation in Mason's lawyer's letter was answered with records already sitting in the company's files: interview dates, hiring documents, HR policies, reporting structures, and security logs. There were no emotional arguments, Just evidence. Before sending the letter, Rachel added one final paragraph warning that any further attempts to contact me, interfere with company operations, or spread knowingly false statements would be treated as continuing harassment and defamation. She signed it, sent it by certified mail, then looked at me. My prediction? Yes. We've heard the last from his attorney. She was almost right. 3 quiet days passed, without anonymous emails, fake social media accounts, or unknown phone numbers. For the first time since the gala, I slept through the night without checking my phone. On Monday evening, Adrian invited me over for dinner. I've been practicing, he announced proudly. Should I eat first? You have so little faith in me. I've tasted your cooking. To my surprise, he really had improved. The chicken's actually edible. I'll take that. The vegetables still need work. He laughed. I knew there had to be a catch. We were finishing dinner when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I'll ignore it. The call stopped. A second later, it started again. Then a third time. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then Mason spoke. His words were slow and slightly slurred. He'd been drinking. How did you get this number? I asked. I found it. That's not an answer. He gave a tired laugh. You always cared about details. What do you want? After another long pause, he whispered, You ruined my life. I stared at the phone. Excuse me? Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Mom.
No, Mason.
They do. His breathing grew heavier. Brandon left me. Who? My manager. He stumbled over his words before correcting himself. My project partner. We were working together. The explanation barely made sense, but I wasn't interested in sorting through a drunken conversation. What happened? He says I'm obsessed with you. I closed my eyes. Mason. I'm not. You called my office. Silence. You contacted human resources. Silence. You hired a lawyer. Silence. You created fake accounts just to reach me. His voice cracked. I just wanted you to understand. I do understand. No, you don't. His tone suddenly sharpened. You showed up with him. I attended my company's gala. You held his hand. Because we're together. Another long silence followed. Finally, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Listening to him, I realized something had changed. For the first time, he no longer intimidated me. He just sounded exhausted. Mason. What? You ended our engagement because you decided my future wasn't worth believing in. Mason didn't answer. I didn't build this life to prove you wrong, I said quietly. I built it because you walked away. Life didn't stop when you left. After a long silence, he tried one last time. He's using you. No. He's older. By 3 years. He'll leave eventually. Maybe. Even my own answers surprise me. Relationships sometimes end. That doesn't mean they're not worth having. He whispered my name. Claire. I truly hope you find happiness someday. I was happier with... No, I interrupted gently. You were happier because you believed I'd always be waiting. Then I ended the call, blocked the number, and set my phone face down. For a while, neither Adrian nor I spoke. Finally, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You okay? A few months earlier, that conversation would have ruined my entire week. Now it simply felt finished. I think that was the last conversation I'll ever need with him. Adrian nodded. I hope you're right. For several days, it looked like Rachel's prediction had come true. Then our social media manager walked into Adrian's office carrying screenshots. Someone had created yet another anonymous Instagram account, accusing unnamed women of chasing powerful men and suggesting the company rewarded unethical relationships. Neither Adrian nor I were identified directly, but the company's official account had been tagged repeatedly. Before lunch, Rachel gathered us in her office. This ends today. She added the screenshots to the growing file containing every fake account, anonymous complaint, phone call, email, and legal threat Mason had created over the previous weeks. The pattern speaks for itself. She drafted one final cease and desist letter demanding that Mason immediately stop contacting me, stop involving the company, stop publishing false statements, and preserve all electronic communications in anticipation of possible litigation. It ended with a clear warning that any further harassment would result in court action, including a request for a restraining order. The notice was delivered that afternoon. After that, nothing happened after that. The anonymous accounts stopped. The calls stopped. Even the emails disappeared. For the first time since the breakup, the silence felt permanent instead of temporary. Months later, I learned Mason had quietly packed his belongings and moved away from the city. He disappeared from my life as suddenly as he'd once walked out of it. Life, meanwhile, kept moving. 4 months after the gala, spring arrived. The company had nearly doubled in size, and one Monday morning, Adrian asked me to stop by his office before our engineering meeting. I have something for you. He handed me a folder. Inside was a promotion letter. Lead software developer. I looked up in disbelief. You're promoting me? I'm congratulating you. Seeing my confusion, he smiled. I removed myself from every decision involving your compensation or promotions the moment we started dating. He pointed to the approval page. Engineering leadership, HR, finance, and the COO had evaluated my performance independently. Every review, recommendation, and approval had been completed without Adrian's involvement. You earned this, he said. No one handed it to you. For the first time in a long while, I believed those words without questioning them. The promotion mattered. What meant even more was realizing Adrian had protected both my career and my reputation long before either of us imagined we'd be together. That afternoon, the engineering team surprised me with cupcakes in the break room. Daniel lifted his coffee cup. To Claire, everyone joined the toast. No one mentioned Mason. No one questioned whether I'd earned my place. My work had already answered that for them. A month later, Adrian and I moved into what he stubbornly called our townhouse. The second bedroom became my office, the garage became his workshop full of half-finished projects, and our biggest arguments were over how he loaded the dishwasher and folded laundry. Some habits never changed. Thankfully, those little disagreements usually ended with both of us laughing. The first weekend after we moved in, my parents came over for dinner. While Adrian wrestled with patio furniture in the backyard, my mother quietly pulled me aside. He adores you. I know. She smiled and shook her head. No, I mean I've watched him all afternoon. She glanced toward the window. He isn't looking at you to see what you can do for him. That simple observation stayed with me. Mason had loved the version of me that fit neatly into his plans. Adrian loved the person behind those plans, the woman who challenged him in meetings, came home exhausted after difficult days, and kept getting back up anyway. A few weeks later, I stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop before heading into the office. While waiting for my order, I recognized Emily, one of Mason's closest friends. After a brief, awkward pause, she walked over. I owe you an apology. For what? I believed him. She admitted that, at first, she'd accepted every story Mason told, but the details kept changing. One week, he claimed Adrian had hired me because we were already involved. The next, he'd convinced himself the company had covered everything up. Eventually, she said, everyone started asking the same question. What question? If any of that were true, why did every document prove the opposite? I smiled. Facts usually win in the end. She nodded. They did. Before leaving, she told me Mason had moved to another city to start over. I hope it works out for him, I said. She looked surprised. You're not angry anymore? I thought about it for a moment. I was. But anger costs too much. She frowned. What do you mean? It keeps charging you long after the person who hurt you has moved on. I picked up my coffee and wished her well. Walking back to my car, I realized I'd spent months believing anyone connected to Mason would reopen old wounds. Instead, it felt like talking about someone who no longer had a place in my life. That evening, Adrian and I ordered takeout and watched the sunset from our patio, talking about work, weekend plans, and everything except the past. For the first time in a long time, I was more excited about what lay ahead than what I'd left behind. Adrian glanced at me across the patio. What are you thinking about? Mason. He waited. I realized something. What? I don't miss him, and I don't think I need to forgive him anymore. He frowned slightly. You never had to. I know, but I also don't have to keep carrying what happened. He reached across the table and laced his fingers through mine. You've changed. So have you. I hope that's a good thing. It is. A few months later, Kevin called. Guess who emailed me? Mason? Yeah. What did he want? He apologized. That caught me off guard. For everything? Kevin laughed quietly. He admitted he spent months convincing himself that if your new life fell apart, you'd come back. Eventually, he realized that wasn't love. After we hung up, I stood by the kitchen window, watching Adrian water the plants outside. I never received an apology myself. Surprisingly, I didn't need one. Every now and then I think about that Saturday morning after I lost my job, the carefully staged Instagram photo, the caption about outgrowing people, and how convinced I was that he was talking about me. Back then, I believed unemployment had somehow made me less successful, less worthy, less deserving of love. I understand now that losing my job didn't expose my ambition. It exposed the limits of Mason's loyalty. Everything good that followed, the new career, the promotion, the relationship with Adrian, and the life we built together, began the moment I stopped chasing someone who had already chosen to leave. People sometimes assume I rebuilt my life to make Mason regret leaving. None of it happened because I was trying to prove Mason wrong. It happened because life kept moving, and eventually I did too. It was simply what happened after I stopped looking backward. While I was moving forward, Mason kept trying to rewrite a decision that could never be undone. I accepted the consequences of his choice. He spent months fighting them. Rumors, anonymous complaints, fake accounts, even a lawyer's letter. None of it changed the one fact that mattered. He walked away. I didn't. I simply kept walking after he did. Looking back, I don't think losing my job ended our relationship. It simply exposed what had already been there. The first real problem arrived the moment life stopped being convenient for Mason. Months later, I opened Mason's old Instagram post one last time. My comment was still there. Just one word. Truth. This time it made me smile. This time I smiled. For the first time, the word beneath that post belonged entirely to me. Looking back, I realized the word I'd left beneath his post had never been meant for Mason at all. It was a reminder to myself that my worth had never depended on whether someone chose to stay.